I'd like to preface today's speech with two rather bold statements. The first is that I genuinely believe that music is one of the greatest and most powerful healing tools that we have available today. And in saying that, I know that that's not really telling any of you anything you don't already know. You know, I know, the science knows that music heals, it cures pain, it helps with learning, it helps with attention, it certainly helps with Tourette's syndrome. In fact, the list goes on to so many conditions and situations that I can't even list them here. So you guys all know that. I just wanted you to know that that's the one theme that's going to be present throughout everything I say today. Everything rotates around this one theme, and that is the healing power of music. The other bold statement that I'd like to share with you is a slightly more personal one to me. And that is, music quite literally saved my life. In fact, had it not been for music, I don't know where I would be today. I don't know if I'd be here sitting talking to you now. Now, before you all reach for the Kleenex, I'm really not here to try and make you join me in a cry fest. It's not going to be a sobathon with Nick as we listen to a misery scenario. What I do think, though, is my story is a bit brutal at times, and that's part of it. The great thing is, though, that brutality is balanced with, I think, a very uplifting aspect that relates directly to music. So I have Tourette's syndrome, and my body gyrates, I tick, I flex my muscles, I shatter my teeth together, I contort my neck, I clench my buttocks, I strain my feet multiple times each day. In fact, it's been measured with me that my body ticks or moves involuntarily about 70,000 times a day, involuntary movements. So that's quite exhausting. In fact, it was Oliver Sacks who said to me, if you take someone without Tourette's and you suddenly give them severe Tourette's, then they'll probably die of exhaustion in the first 24 hours. And it's a very exhausting condition. But there's an elephant in the room with Tourette's, and that is swearing. If you say to a lot of people still today, and I've done this many times in my life, I've got Tourette's or such and such has Tourette's, the instant reaction is that person, are you, Nick, going to swear at us? And that's a really difficult thing to deal with. I'm not sure where the swearing aspect comes from in Tourette's. I certainly don't have it. Only about 5 or 10% people with Tourette's actually have that aspect of it, but I don't, so I can't speak of it. I certainly know I don't have it, but the misconception is still there. Society looks at people with Tourette's and says, you swear, you abuse people. And I mean, I went to a party in London not so long ago, and the host, in great British theatrical way, announced very loudly to the other guests that Nick has arrived and Nick has Tourette's. The room went silent. And then there were these squeals of giddy delight that only the British seem to do so well, emanating from all around the room as everyone converged on me and started asking when the verbal abuse was about to start. So I wasn't quite the party guest, I was more the party accessory in that case. Again, misconceptions. Needless to say, I wasn't invited back. So when did all this begin? The little boy of 7, that was me, woke up one day to a completely normal life, which I had, the normal little boy, happy at school, doing well. Except that day was very different. Out of the blue, I started shaking my head violently from side to side, contorting my body, punching myself in the stomach, grinding my teeth. Day by day, this got worse. I was terrified. My parents were terrified, of course. Where did it come from? What was it? We visited doctor after doctor, medicines, bad nerves, he's faking it, spank him. All these things were prescribed. My parents never went down the route of spanking me or punishing me for this. They knew something was wrong, and I knew something was wrong. But they put me on Valium at the age of 8. I didn't like to take them. They were bitter, so I didn't. Thankfully, I avoided becoming a Valium junkie at that age. But the confusion to a little boy who was suddenly making all of these movements and expending all of this energy, this additional energy, was exhausting. And I slowly began to kind of wilt. The great thing is, kids of that age understand very well. They're very accepting around that age. And my friends just looked at me and said, okay, Nick does strange things. Some even tried doing them with me. The problems occurred when I was 11 and I moved up to the big school. That is, from the age of 11 to 17 in the UK, we go to secondary school. Hormones start running wild in people. Boys are trying to be alpha males and dominate their surroundings. What better excuse to show off your alpha prowess than to bully someone? I was prime target for bullying. I made vocal tics, I made noises, no swearing, sounds, facial tics. I couldn't disguise what I was. And kids can be brutal, and they were. I was mocked and mimicked day after day. I would pee my pants on many days, up until the age of about 15, because I was terrified I was being beaten, tormented, and humiliated. And the teachers were complicit. It was perhaps the most tragically dark time of my life. And it was something I don't think I'll ever recover from. Being told every day that you're the freak, you're the freak, you're the freak, and being punished for being that freak. But then something incredible happened. At 12 years old, I discovered the piano. And my life literally changed, and my life was saved. I looked at this thing and I saw all the keys on it in front of me. There were my fingers. I put my fingers on the keys. I didn't know what to do. And suddenly, the most incredible thing happened, and that is I stopped ticking. The movements, the extra, the involuntary movements, all stopped as soon as I started making music. And I wasn't making proper music. I was just making sounds at the piano. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no coordination, no training, but something healed me. It was almost instantaneous. It was as though somehow someone had given me an intravenous shot of something. I was suddenly the boy who could go for a few minutes without gyrating or moving or ticking or clenching my teeth. I was at peace finally. So I lapped up playing the piano. I was desperate to learn. I loved it. The sounds I couldn't get enough of, because while I was at the piano, I was tick-free. I was healed of something that I had that was only labeled then as bad nerves. I still didn't know what I had. I knew I had something, and I knew the piano was the way to solve things. It was brilliant because I kind of had this cure within myself, so I could go to the piano and take time out from this busy and really hectic life that was mine, a life of actually exhausting movements, but also horrific bullying. The more I learned the piano, I got better and better very rapidly. And I entered the Royal College of Music just 3 years after starting. And I was still at school, but I was allowed to study at the Royal College at the same time. So at school, I was the freak. I was still bullied. But at the Royal College, I was Nick the pianist. Nick who was a good pianist. And Nick who was accepted. Yes, he had some strange tics and movements, but then we're musicians. We can accept that. I found home and I found peace. And it was a bizarre dual existence of music and beauty and relief from my symptoms, which were aggressive, and the pain of school and still being bullied. The pinnacle of the agony, I would say, came when I was 15, and I had a brother who was 9 years older than I was. My brother clearly suffered from what we now know was Tourette's, although not as aggressively as I have it, but he still had a lot of bodily tics and movements. He was also a pianist, but he'd long ago stopped. He found life too hard, and he took his own life when I was 15 and he was 24. 2 days later at school, Nick the freaky pianist, was made to stand up in his class because I made too many involuntary noises. And the teacher endorsed the whole class as they stood spitting in my face. That would shut me up, she said. That would make me learn what I was. I was the freak. And I cried. I stood at 15 years old and I cried. For the first time, they broke me. But I had music. And I went home that day and I ran to the piano and I knew that there was my savior. Still, the music soothed me, despite everything that had happened, a brother committing suicide, a family in turmoil, me being aggressively bullied. Despite all of that, the music still spoke to me. It still healed me. It was the most wonderful and tragic thing all at the same time. And I lapped up that day and I'll never forget it. And from then on, the bullying at school stopped. They'd broken me. There was no interest in tormenting the freak anymore because he was nothing. And that was actually fine by me. Aged 18, I finally left school and went to the Royal College full time. And there I did thrive and flourish. I was in an environment surrounded by music, surrounded by people who accepted this guy has strange tics and makes strange noises, but he can play the piano. And when he plays the piano, all of those things stop. It was kind of a miracle. And I do see it as being semi-miraculous. I wish I knew what was going on in my brain when all this happens. I know you guys will have experience of many situations like this where symptoms stop because of the power of music, where pain is alleviated because of the power of music. It's remarkable. After the Royal College of Music came the biggest shock, and that was to finally get a diagnosis. And after many years of being poked and prodded by doctors who didn't have a clue what was going on, one wise old doctor said, "I think you might have Tourette's syndrome." I'd never heard of it. No one I knew had ever heard of it. And I trundled off with a new label. And labels, as we know, can be very detrimental. But for me, it was a label I embraced. This was something that was truly me. I could say, look, I'm not putting this on. I don't need to be beaten. I'm not the freak. I have a legitimate condition. And furthermore, music helps it. The problem was my Tourette's, as I now knew it to be, was getting worse by the day. I was the budding pianist with a great career ahead of me, apparently. I loved music. I couldn't get enough of that still. But I was absolutely exhausted. I'd fractured my jaw, my neck was fractured, my feet were fractured. I was punching myself in the stomach and I was in pain. I needed medical help. And that came in the form of, unfortunately, the only kind of medicine that works for Tourette's, and that's antipsychotic medication. Great for those whom it can help. Unfortunately, a disaster as far as making music goes. We know that the creative process has to allow us to fire our neurons and the things in our brain. The brain waves can't be stilted. And of course, the antipsychotic just stopped everything. I was like a zombie. I couldn't play, but I didn't know what was happening. So I carried on with these. And I entered a huge piano competition. Of course, we all know competitive music is ridiculous, but I did it at the time. And I was in the final 12 out of 190 who started. And I, for the first time in my life, I was playing the piano and my body started ticking. It never happened before. I was suddenly in uncharted waters. The piano had been my savior. Why was it now working against me? I now know, of course, that it wasn't the piano that was working against me. It was the medication that was working against me. I didn't know that at the time. I did one more concert, a televised concert in Poland, and I didn't touch the piano for 8 years. I got rid of my pianos. I moved away and I said, okay, I don't know what to do anymore. I no longer have music. Of course, during that time, you can't give up something that's as potent as music. So I listened to music, I just didn't play it. I was still getting some benefits from it, but I wasn't getting the active participation, that incredible sense of peace that you get when you perform. But I didn't want it because I was scared of it now. So what to do? I woke up one day and said, okay, I've got Tourette's. I'm in a dreadful situation. I'm going to write a book about it. So in 3 weeks, by hand, at the rate, I couldn't even tell you how fast I was going, I wrote my book. And it was a small print run, a small publishers, but it made waves in the UK. And I was interviewed all over the place, radio, TV. And suddenly, out of nowhere, the BBC's flagship documentary series asked me to present a program on creativity, music, the brain, and how music helps people. Going to the United States was where I went to film this because, frankly, you guys are so much further ahead than anywhere else in terms of creativity and music and therapies associated with them. And it was an incredible journey. I was still not playing the piano, but I went and interviewed people who were actually from serial killers to people with Parkinson's, schizophrenics, who found joy and peace and the therapy of music. They found the healing power in that music. Yes, there were other creative arts as well going on, but music was the dominant one. I knew, again, that they were feeling that same relief that I felt when I touched the piano through their pursuits. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a great pianist or a great instrumentalist. It doesn't matter what music you're playing. You can play anything. You can be at any level. You can be a passive person in this scenario or an active participant. Music heals, and we know it. And I learnt it again. After 8 years of seclusion and retirement, I made a comeback concert in the UK. And actually, Tourette's was a little bit more front and center in people's minds, and it hit world headlines from CNN, CBS, Good Morning America. Every channel on the BBC featured me as well. And I got amazing reviews for this comeback concert. And the British music industry went silent. It turns out they didn't like my backstory. They don't like musicians who are vocal in something that's important to them other than music. And I had something to share, and that was, in a sense, triumph over adversity. Yes, look what music can do. But my main thing was, look what happens when I play the piano. I'm tick-free. You're not going to see a freak at the piano. You're going to see someone who can play. And that was my message. And very few people wanted it. So I had to carry on. And that was fine, because I was finally doing what I wanted, and that was performing. Not necessarily in the venues I'd hoped for, because the industry didn't want me. And that was fine as well, for a time. It was fine for a time until the Times newspaper and the Telegraph newspapers ran some stories about me in which they exposed the fact that the industry in the UK, the classical music industry, had actively thwarted any chance I had to get ahead. They'd smeared me. They'd said, and I quote, "We will not inflict someone with Tourette's syndrome on a British audience." he's simply not good enough. Why doesn't he learn his place? It's pathetic that he's wheeling out his backstory in the hope of getting concerts. 2 public relations companies were hired to smear me and close me down in the press. I was not allowed to speak about diversity, which is a subject so close to me. So the UK, as far as I'm concerned, is finished, but that leaves a huge world out there where I know people are interested not only in the music, but they're also interested in the person behind the music, the person performing, and that is it. It is actually a human interest story. I can say something that even if it touches one person, even if it helps or encourages one person, then I'm happy. And that's where I am today. All that remains is for me now to thank Wendy and the wonderful team at the AMTA for their support and for inviting me to speak to you guys. I hope it hasn't been a traumatic journey. I've just had a pretty traumatic life in so many ways, but the overarching theme is the power of music and how it heals. And my main thanks is to you guys, all the music therapists and people who know that music can heal. You in the United States are leading the way in that field. And for that, I thank you. Thank you for listening.